I've written a book and illustrated a book called Paul Writes a Letter. And it is a book for children about the chapters of the New Testament that are written by Paul or traditionally attributed to Paul. I wanted to write a book about St. Paul for children and decided that I would approach it very much as the story of one man's writing letters. And to me, part of the emphasis of the book is, of course, what's in the letters, but also the fact of the letters themselves, that they have become part of our world history, and they're hugely important letters for everyone, whether you're aware of them or not. Many things have come from those letters that are part of cultural experience. For instance, money is the root of all evil. Anyway, so the book is a retelling of parts of those letters with emphasizing again that Paul was a person writing to friends, real people, writing about things that were of concern to him, and we still read his letters. This book, I have to credit my agent for the initial idea. I hadn't thought of that. She suggested I try writing a book for children about St. Paul. And I thought, well, how will I go about that? And I simply thought, first of all, I need to know what I'm writing about. So I sat down and simply read straight through all of the letters of St. Paul. And took notes of my favorite bits. And then realizing that the number of pages that I would have to work with in the book form would fit nicely with the number of letters that are in the New Testament, that maybe I could just devote a spread of pages to each book and see what would happen. What happened was that there is a story that comes out as you read through the book, and the fact that it's distilled enough that you can read all of the letters at once, you do have a sense, or at least I came away with a sense of this man Paul through his own words in his own letters. I personally love to read letters of writers and like that way of learning about a person's biography simply by reading his or her letters. And you feel that in Paul's letters as he gets older, as he worries about his future, and finally when he is a prisoner in Rome, you sense his, you just sense the end of his work and life, and it becomes a story within the letters themselves. My favorite line from the book is from the letter to the Philippians, which goes, "Whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, these are the things you should muse upon." And I think that is a love. We're not burying our heads in the sand, but we're thinking about the good things in the world. I've written the title of the book, Paul Writes, and then parentheses open, a letter, parentheses closed. And it's a little bit of I won't say a joke, but it's thinking about what if you are a churchgoer, if you were raised in a religious family and you went to church, you often heard Paul writes. And then we heard a reading. And as a child, you hear Paul writes, and you think, well, whatever that means, kind of. And what it has come to mean, in a sense, is that this is preparing you for a Bible verse. What I wanted to do was emphasize, nod to that it's Paul writes, by putting a letter in parentheses. I'm trying to say that, in fact, a real man named Paul is writing a real letter. And when you are raised in a church, certainly I lost that awareness, because it becomes part of the form of going to church. And so I was trying to remove that a little bit from the form and make it, again, something to think about, the actuality of these letters. My own sense of who Paul was is that he was a very religious man, a scholar, a Jewish scholar, a thinker, and a very devoted man to the teachings of Jesus and to Jesus. I really feel like he does come through as this human person, Paul, because he always addresses his friends. You sometimes feel that he's a little bit, maybe a little bit lonely. Also, he gets angry, which I love, but he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back to the people he's been with and writes to them again. And it's a very human person. He's someone that I like. I think he's clearly a devoted, dedicated, tireless person. And when you read of his being on the ship that nearly founders, you get this sense of this person who's traveled and has seen a great deal, and he basically rallied everyone within the boat to get the boat to shore. So I like Paul very much. One thing, as an adult, before I read through the letters, I did have a sense that of Paul as being a very strict, authoritarian person, because we often think of him that way, that he is a giver of rules, a frowner upon of things or people or actions. I think when you read the letters, you see much more. He is much more broad than that in his thinking, and those moments of strictness or dogmatism need not be the central aspect of him, of his writings. Since I knew I wanted to have what you get from this book is a real person writing real letters, I imagined Paul from what I had read about him, but also from what I've read his letters. And I imagined a man sitting and writing. I acted it out a little bit myself. I imagined myself writing, and I knew that if I were writing, I would probably hold my nose or put my head down or look for inspiration like this, or eat a cookie, or think about something drinking wine. And as soon as I did that, my Paul character that I was drawing, I felt that, yes, he is a living person, and I could do that. And of course, it's audacious to draw somebody, to create somebody I've never met. I looked at many statues and portraits of Paul that have come to us, Does he have hair? Does he not have hair? I go with the bald Paul. Not everyone goes with a bald Paul. And how old might he be? I tried to make him older. But as soon as I made him scratch his head and pull on his ears, that's when he became alive to me. I have illustrated and or written, I will go ahead and say many books. It's probably 70 now. And I would say that each book is different, and I mean, it's the same because I always feel like it's falling apart in the middle, so they all are similar that way. But I do try to treat each book straightforwardly. Sometimes I've wished I just had a way of just, you know, approaching every book kind of the same way and just doing it. It never has worked out that way for me, and I've always, well, partly because I do believe that the work of art in picture books particularly is the book itself. It's not the illustrations, it's not the text, it's the whole thing. So how pages are turning, how it is arranged, how detailed or not detailed the art is, determines how quickly you move through the book, and that's important often. Kind of the rhythm of the book itself is determined by the look of the book. Generally, I like to have the art that I create feel like it's very much on the surface of the pages itself, not like you're looking deep, deep, deep in, because I like it all to be sort of right there. You know, there's different ways. Sometimes when you're reading a novel, you want to have this sense of looking deep, deep, deep into both the story and the illustrations. And I like that too, but generally in picture books, I like it to be more immediate and right there. One thing that I guess is usually true of my books is that they're fairly, the artwork anywhere is fairly loose, and try to have it have a kind of an immediate feel, so that if I'm using a big fat brush, you can tell it's a big fat brush, and I usually do use a big fat brush. So you see the dragging of the brush and the blotches and all that kind of thing, and that's part of the same sort of feeling of immediacy, I think. So I always work from smaller versions of the book, which is called a book dummy, and I make a number of those and practice seeing how that looks, and then the finished artwork then is generally the same size as the book that will be made. So, but usually I work with very small things first, or half size. I always keep the dummies, and those are kind of my most treasured things. They're in various boxes.